Hey everyone, a quick word before we get started. The purpose of this video is to go over the requirements of the Citizenship in the World merit badge and provide some context for why it's important and even interesting. From the feedback I've received, many scouts find this merit badge boring and pointless, and that's a shame. However, its purpose is not to provide you with the answers for getting your merit badge, although you may find some information here that can help you with that as well. We hope you enjoy the video and find it enlightening as you progress to this merit badge. Before we get to it, let's quickly review the merit badge requirements, so we can get a better idea of the type of information that they're asking of us. Although it's not presented this way in the requirements, for the purposes of presenting the information here, it's helpful to break it down into three sections: national, international interaction, and the overarching international system. Doing it like this helps us clearly establish how these different elements interact with one another and demonstrate how interconnected our own national systems are with the international world. Let's start with the national system. The national level is like the foundation, giving us a strong starting point from which we can understand the rest of the world. It's not really dealing with how states interact with one another, or how the international system is composed, just with how states organize themselves. Think of it as sort of being like the rules in your house and the way your family runs its household. Immediately, the merit badge requirements establish this by asking us how we become citizens in the United States and how our rights, obligations, and duties work, and then comparing them to other countries. Later, we're also asked to identify the differences between constitutional governments, such as our own, and non-constitutional governments, and then to identify different types of governments all over the world. The next system is the international one. More specifically, it's dealing with the interaction between states. To carry the analogy previously used, it's like going to someone else's house. What does that family do differently from your own? And how does that impact how you behave?
No. We don't use them.
Why do you have them?
We have them so we don't have to use them.
How might it impact how your families behave when they interact with one another? In this case, you're asked to do things such as examine world events and discuss how national interest impacts a state's relationship with other countries, as well as its own internal politics, such as economy and values. Next, you're tasked with doing something similar, but instead asking ourselves how the climate and geography of a country impacts its economy and global partnerships. It may sound boring and abstract at first, but think of it this way. How does a war of worlds between Iran and Saudi Arabia lead to a war in Yemen or economic sanctions against Qatar? What do countries gain and how does it affect them? The deeper you dig, the more it turns into some Game of Thrones level stuff. Of course, not everything can be interesting, but it's still very important to learn regardless. Like, who represents the United States abroad? What exactly are some of the names of these agencies that we hear about? Like the Bureau of International Information Programs? And why do I need a passport when I travel abroad? These are basic elements that make up the country's international affairs, and the merit badge requirements make sure they are covered. Finally, our third block touches more on what you might think about when we talk about citizenship in the world. This relates to international system, the various organizations and values that help determine the way our world interacts. Taking the analogy to its final step, this goes beyond how you interact when you go to your friend's house, and more to do with the rules and values that govern society in general. Laws, culture, that sort of thing. Of course, it's not a perfect analogy, and that's a topic often discussed in college-level international relations classrooms, but it's a good starting point to help us better understand. Although it's the first element of the merit badge, once we understand all the other blocks and pieces and how they work together, we are better able to provide an answer to explain what citizenship in the world means to you and what you think it takes to be a good world citizen. Once pieced together, it becomes clear that today's world requires more than just understanding our own society, but understanding how we fit in the larger world. By doing the latter, we better serve our local communities. Okay, so maybe now you have a better understanding of your merit badge and the requirements. But there's still the most obvious question. Why does any of this matter?
So what did you think of the merit badge at the time you got it?
I remember thinking back when I was a kid, and you do citizenship in the nation, or citizenship in the community, citizenship in the nation, citizenship in the world. And I remember citizenship in the community and the nation being interesting and kind of applicable to me. But citizenship in the world just seemed, I don't know, kind of out of place. I think I was about 10 or 11 when I got it. And so a lot of the questions and some of these things I hadn't heard of. So, I mean, I guess it's nice to get that exposure at a young age.
Let's start by looking at the big picture. America has had a long history of being isolated and mostly insulated from the rest of the world. Geographically speaking, it's a natural inclination as the country is protected by huge oceans on either side. But Americans have often been swayed by ideology too. After all, it was none other than George Washington who, in his farewell address, recommended that Americans avoid foreign entanglements, words that have been repeated by politicians and like minded citizens over the years. It's no wonder that as recently as 2006, Gallup found that 70% of Americans agreed with the statement, "We shouldn't think so much in international concerns, but concentrate on our own national problems." A lot has changed since George Washington's time, however. Not only is the United States the sole superpower, a position which demands a high level of involvement in international affairs, but technology has integrated the world like never before. In 1776, trips across the Atlantic took anywhere from 6 weeks to upwards of 3 months. Today, a flight from Washington, D.C. to London is just over 7 hours. Communication is even faster thanks to telephones, text messages, emails, and everything else that we have in the modern world. In other words, the world isn't quite as big as it once was. Things that happen in other countries have an impact on us much more so than they did 100 years ago, let alone almost 250 years ago. Of course, all of that is very abstract, but it matters in your daily life too. Think about the difference between your life and your parents'. Say, you come hop on League of Legends for a few games. Chances are good that at some point you'll end up playing with and being insulted by people from countries like South Korea, Germany, or Brazil. Once that gets boring, you can head on over to Reddit and comment on pictures, videos, your favorite television shows, or whatever else with people from all over the world. And if you happen to make a friend, you two can talk to each other instantaneously through messaging apps. Now, compare that to your parents' experiences when they were kids. Technological limitations meant that international communication was limited to pen pals or very expensive phone calls. Most of the media they consumed was likely produced right here in the United States. Think of how much media you consume that is at least somewhat foreign based. Manga, games like The Witcher and Players Unknown Battlegrounds, Gangnam
Oppa
Style, and
Gangnam
so much
Style.
more music, and countless international movies. It's a big difference, right? Now compare all that to your grandparents' generation. When you make the comparison, you start to see just how much more important global life is to our world today. In the past, it was easier to ignore the international world because it was distant, both literally and figuratively. Today, it isn't. Planes, the internet, and other technology have made the world much smaller than it ever was before. The international world is integrated into our daily lives in countless ways. It's easy to overlook most of it, but our lives would be different, and I think most of us would agree, worse without it. Unfortunately, this integration into our lives hasn't come with an appropriate level of knowledge about the outside world. A survey conducted by the Council of Foreign Relations and National Geographic Society presented 75 questions on geography, current events, economics, and trade to 1,203 young adults. Among those with at least some college education, aged 18 through 26, the average score was 55%, an F. The report revealed significant gaps between what young people understand about today's world and what they need to know to successfully navigate and compete in it. How do you compare? Let's look at one of the questions on the test and see how you do. Approximately what percentage of the US federal budget is spent on foreign aid? 1%, 5%, 12%, 30%, or 40%? If you answered 1%, then you guessed correctly. The U.S. spends relatively little money on foreign aid as compared to other expenses, but Americans routinely overestimate how much the U.S. spends on foreign aid. So why is it especially important for young people to know these things? Interacting with foreigners and being exposed to foreign cultures and ideas is going to be increasingly common and important as time goes forward and technology continues to make the world smaller and more integrated. At the very least, we want to avoid the embarrassment that came following the 2013 Boston Marathon bombings. The bombings, carried out by Americans of Chechen descent, a territory in Russia, confused enough people that the government of the Czech Republic, a small country in Central Europe next to Germany, were forced to comment about the number of anti-Czech comments on social media and remind Americans that they are, in fact, two different places that are almost 2,000 miles apart. But the importance of citizenship in the world goes beyond the products we use, the media we consume, or how we interact with people from different countries on social media. Think back to the merit badge questions and the blocks we built: national, international, and the international system. Each of these interact with one another, meaning national events can affect international events and in turn the international system, similar to how grassroots efforts in the United States can sometimes affect politics in Washington. This is especially true in the United States. We live in a democratic country where citizens are asked to select individuals to represent them based off their policies and how they view and handle the issues. But now consider an experiment by the Morning Consult, which asked Americans to locate North Korea on the map. The dots are a bit all over the place, sure, but more importantly, they found that those who could find North Korea favored more peaceful policy choices than those who could not. But how can you judge if a policy is good or bad if you don't know where the country is? And if you can't judge a policy, then how can we elect the best possible candidates? We can't. And we end up electing people who don't necessarily have the best tools to help run our country in the best way possible. In other words, being informed about global events can have direct implications on our own government as well as our lives, even more directly through it. Of course, simply memorizing geography doesn't mean that you're more knowledgeable about complex international situations, but the studies do highlight how being informed impacts our views and solutions. Talking about these things in theory and with some general examples is fine, but what about some real-life examples using major world events? And what better major world events to use than the two world wars? To many of us today, World War I seems like a silly war, caused by an archaic system of alliances led by distant monarchs more concerned with their own honor than the welfare of their people. The Great War, as it was known, pitted Germany, Austria-Hungary, and the Ottoman Empire against an alliance of states led by France, the United Kingdom, Russia, and at the end of the war, the United States. The war, expected to be a short affair, dragged on for 5 years and killed over 18 million people. Fueled by new weapons of war such as tanks, poison gas, and machine guns. A lot of this is well known, but what you may not know is that many experts believe that a great war among European powers was unthinkable. In their minds, Europe had come so far with the establishment of international ties primarily in the form of commercial interdependence, but also, to a lesser extent, in the form of communication and shared values. People were interacting internationally more than they ever had before, and it was believed that these personal connections would limit the willingness of people to go to war. Obviously, these experts were wrong, but after the war, efforts to promote this line of thinking and the same values as this merit badge could be seen. After the war, efforts were made to further strengthen the international system to prevent the horrors of the Great War. The League of Nations was formed, and additions were made to the Geneva Conventions to prevent the use of poison gas and to protect prisoners of war. But efforts were also made on an individual level as well. Take, for example, the efforts of Ambassador Henry Morgenthau Jr., As the war began, Ottoman officials saw an opportunity to take care of an unwanted population: Christian Armenians. Armenian men were conscripted into the Ottoman army, and while away, their families were marched south for relocation, where they were starved, raped, and gunned down in the desert. While mass killings were nothing new, the systematic, deliberate nature of the killings shocked the American ambassador, who hounded the Ottoman government and pressed the United States to act. The American government, as was standard at the time, viewed the issue as an internal Ottoman affair, and furthermore, the U.S. government was attempting to maintain neutrality in the war, which restricted the ambassador's ability to act on behalf of the United States. Nevertheless, Ambassador Morgenthau pressed on, at one point having an Ottoman official question him, asking, "Why do you care? You're Jewish, these are Christians." To which he replied, "Well, I am the ambassador to the United States, which is 90 to 95% Christian, so when I talk to you right now, I'm 90% Christian. But the other point is that what you're doing is wrong, and you're not going to get away with it, and you shouldn't get away with it. So I will do everything I can to stop you." Morgenthau wasn't able to get the American government to intervene directly. But when he returned to the United States, he managed to work with other philanthropists and formed the Near East Foundation. The foundation campaigned on behalf of the Armenians and managed to raise and distribute over $100 million of supplies to Armenians. Ambassador Morgenthau is an excellent example of citizenship in the world, as were the countless people who contributed to help a group of people on the other side of the world, something not so common 100 years ago as it is today. While many positive steps were taken after World War I, the system still wasn't strong enough, and ultimately World War II broke out. An important thing to note is that much more so than World War I, World War II was an ideological war. People in countries such as France, the United States, and the United Kingdom saw themselves as having similar values and ways of life, as opposed to Nazi Germany, Fascist Italy, and Imperial Japan. It is no coincidence that these states allied with each other, and even before the United States entered the war, the American population was sympathetic to the Allied cause, even if isolationist sentiments remained strong. This penchant for democracies to work together is related to a modern-day theory called democratic peace theory, which notes that countries which share a democratic government do not go to war with each other, and argues that this is because of shared values between citizens of these countries that result in neither party seeing the other as a threat. In other words, the sharing of values, beliefs, ideas, and even money can have a major impact on how states interact with each other, all of which can start on an individual level. World War II also resulted in the modern international system that we have today. We established the United Nations and set about to connect the world politically and economically. As a result, the world has never been as connected as it is now, with an incredible amount of international trade, travel, and communication, and with many organizations, such as the UN, World Trade Organization, and G20, helping to promote the better, more peaceful world that idealists imagined before the outbreak of World War I. As an organization, the Boy Scouts attempts to prepare young people to make ethical and moral choices over their lifetimes by imparting values, including the duty to one's country. While the focus of this merit badge may be on citizenship in the world, this video has sought to show how being a good citizen in the world is connected to being a good citizen here in the United States, by demonstrating the ways that national institutions and values connect to the wide world that we live in. The questions that this merit badge presents to Scouts attempts to educate you while also demonstrating those very same connections between our government and the wider international system. Being a citizen of the world doesn't mean being a worse American citizen. On the contrary, it means that you will be better able to do your duty as a citizen and help guide this country to make better choices in the world. As you go about earning this merit badge, think about the ways the international world impacts yourself and your country, and think about how interconnected these things are.
What do you think of the merit badge now?
I still kind of feel that way, especially at my young age. It didn't really apply to me at that age. And I think now we're in a much more global economy. The United States has become a marketplace. We're not actually, really making a whole lot. We do make some stuff, but the United States has really become a marketplace. So more than ever, we're interacting with all these different nations. We've got a war going on right now. There's just a lot of things that are going on in the world that the United States and us that we're interacting with. So I think right now it's more applicable than ever. But I still think trying to do it at a young age is probably not the best approach, and having scouts that are older, maybe 16, 17, doing it would make much more sense.
What do you think is the difference in your understanding of what it means to be a citizen in the world from when you first took the merit badge as compared to now? Like, what do you think the conceptual differences are?
Clueless to begin with. I think the big thing when I was younger, knowing about nations and knowing some things about them was enough to think I was a citizen in the world. But I think now, understanding the people that you're interacting with on a day-to-day basis. I mean, I'm not traveling out of the country very much, but I still get to interact with people possibly on a daily basis that are from outside of the United States. So I think that's important, and I think understanding maybe how interacting and being in those interactions is probably more important rather than some of the factual based stuff that you learn about in the merit badge.